Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's digital panel discussion on lessons learned from COVID-19 short-term data requirements for long-term decisions making, which is held as a part of the German EU Council Presidency in the field of statistics. I would like to extend my thanks to Dr. Markus Richter, State Secretary at the Federal Ministry of the Interior, Building and Community, and Mrs. Mariana Kosteva, Director General of Eurostat, for their keynotes, which have provided important stimuli for the discussion that is about to begin. I would like to thank all the participants of the panel for the engagement in the discussion and for sharing their view of the current situation. On 1st July 2020, Germany took over the presidency of the Council of the European Union for 6 months. The planning for this task, however, started much earlier. And like in so many areas of our life, COVID-19 left its mark in the planning for the Council presidency. As a result, the program in the field of statistics focuses on the lessons learned from the corona crisis. We have taken on this task under the motto, Together for Europe's Recovery. The aim is to establish a program that is coordinated across Europe in order to meet data requirements for action and counteraction in the pandemic. On the one hand, and for measuring the effects of the pandemic on the other. What we have noticed in the last months is we need data to provide information on the economic situation, for example, and how the individual sectors are currently doing. Within this context, the Federal Statistics has hosted a digital conference since September. The conference consists of a number of different online contributions, such as a podcast, articles, and interactive formats. And it is aimed at bringing together the users and the producers of official statistics. COVID-19 had impacted on nearly all areas of our social life. At the end of this digital conference, we would like to look at the effects on the world of business and finance or panel. What requirements will statistics have to meet so that fact-based and quick decisions can be taken during the current crisis? Great pleasure for me to welcome the moderator of today's discussion, Mr. Stefan Schweinfest. He is the director of UN Statistics Division and joins us from New York today. I hope the technical support will connect all these locations we have in the conference. Mr. Schweinfest has years of experience in the statistical area. He knows the official statistics on both European and international level like no other. Apart from that, he has been the moderator of many events. Virtual formats are nothing new to him either. It was only recently that he gave a speech to an audience to several thousand people at the UN Data Forum, which is held in a virtual form this year. Mr. Schweinfest, would you like to tell us briefly what, from the perspective of the UN Statistics Division, your view is on the lessons learned from COVID-19, and then you take over the moderation of this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thiel, and thank you very much for inviting me to be with you for this digital conference today. I think it was very brave of you to ask me in New York to get up so early, but I can show you, I think I'm well prepared. I have my favorite cup of coffee for the cup that I brought from home. So I wish I could have traveled and be with you a little bit closer. I'm actually very close to the Destatis from the Aschaffenburg area in Germany. But today we are transcending geography, and we're here together with an international panel, and you have put a fantastic panel together, and I'm very, very happy about to talk about this very important topic. COVID has been a major disruption of all our lives, but and the statisticians are no exception. I mean, in countries around the world, especially in 2020, where we from the United Nations had, of course, launched the World Census Round, many countries were struggling with the interruptions of their normal statistical operations, census taking, survey taking. And we responded in the UN Statistics Division by creating a platform where countries could actually report to us the concerns that they had, the difficulties that they had, and the ideas that they had in order to address the pandemic. And this has become a communication, a solidarity platform, which I'm very proud of, because the technical community, the statisticians around the world have come experiences, how they moved, for instance, in terms of survey taking, from door-to-door questionnaires to online questionnaires or telephone questionnaires. So there is a wealth of information that we have been able to collect together with our colleagues from the World Bank. We also have actually sent out a need assessment questionnaire that helps us to better understand how we, at the international level, can actually support countries in this difficult situation. For us at the United Nations, of course, one of our major policy agendas right now are the Sustainable Development Goals. We are in year 5, and we have just launched a decade of action, and we've already in our report this year told the world that we are lacking behind the ambitions of the agenda, and of course the fact that we are now all struggling with the consequences of the pandemic is going to make this even more difficult. But on the other hand, I am a deep believer and hopeless optimist. In every crisis there is an opportunity. And statisticians around the world have actually been quite creative and innovative to respond to the crisis. We have seen many examples of smart use of modern technology. I think this crisis has jolted us all really into the new IT world. There are many interesting topics to be discussed, and we are discussing them at the United Nations. I invite all of our friends to come to the Statistical Commission next year, even if it's virtual, and participate in our discussion. And there are interesting topics such as the data stewardship. What is the new role of national statistical offices in putting all the various information elements together, whether they are big data, official data, geospatial information, and integrate different data elements in a new data architecture for the users. We have, of course, the perennial discussions and challenges about data quality. I even often say we have in this crisis to develop a whole new data culture. There is, of course, also the issue of international cooperation, and as I already mentioned, I'm very happy to see in your example how you are here taking leadership at the level of the European Union, and we are trying to bring the world together around solutions at the level of the United Nations, and I'm very happy that we responded so constructively in our professional community to this challenge. We have just, as you mentioned, organized a World Statistics Day and a World Data Forum with over 10,000 people. If somebody at the beginning of my career had told me that I would organize an event where there is a sign at the door where it says, "Careful, we will be talking about statistics, numbers, and data," and 10,000 people would sign up to discuss with us, I would have not believed it, but it only shows that we are living a data moment. So with these introductory remarks, I wanted to thank you, Dr. Thiel, again, and the German team for putting this fantastic event together, this digital conference. And then I don't want to take more time from the phenomenal panel that has been put together. And I suggest we move to the panel formation. And it is my great pleasure to welcome now around the virtual table Professor Schnabel, Professor Feld, Dominic Rosgrud, Professor Benassi-Kere, and Mr. Palmieri. And you find all of their backgrounds on the fantastic web page that has been put together by the organizers of this event. And without to briefly introduce themselves and their initial thoughts on this topic before we go into 3 rounds of moderated discussions. So may I invite Professor Schnabel to break the ice for us today. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to take part in today's panel to discuss the data requirements for policy decisions under the difficult conditions of the coronavirus crisis. When the pandemic broke out in Europe and strict containment measures were introduced, the health crisis quickly spilled over into financial markets and the real economy, forcing governments and central banks to act swiftly to prevent the massive shock from turning into an even deeper depression. Decisions had to be taken quickly on the basis of limited data, and the main data available in real time were financial market data. These data are mostly provided by external data providers. In addition, some data are collected by the ECB itself at a high reporting frequency, such as the money market statistical reporting, MMSR, for which the ECB compiles daily data on about 50,000 transactions from a sample of around 50 euro area banks. While the financial market data were sending unmistakable signals that we were approaching a severe financial crisis, data on the economic fallout became known only later. Many of the indicators monitored by the ECB are provided by the National Statistical Institutes and the European Statistical System, ESS. While some indicators, like the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices, the HICP, are released with a lag of only 15 days, with the flash estimate coming out already on the last day of the month, other important variables, like those related to the labor market, only become available after a longer time period and generally without a flash estimate. As a result, some developments can be observed only with a substantial lag. In addition, many indicators are backward-looking rather than providing indications for future developments. Private companies have tried to fill this gap by publishing timely, forward-looking indicators based on survey data, like the Purchasing Manager Index, PMI, or sentiment indicators, which have become standard input for economic projections. During the pandemic, many forecasters, including central banks, have experimented with using high-frequency indicators such as card payments and energy usage for nowcasting exercises. With regard to statistics, the ECB is in a unique position in that we are both a producer of data and statistics and an intensive user of data provided by public authorities or commercial data providers. This position allows us to understand both the difficulties of producing data under the challenging conditions imposed by the pandemic, as well as the data gaps that have emerged during the crisis. In the pandemic, the ECB adopted numerous measures with respect to data production in order to be able to appropriately calibrate our policy response. Let me give you a few concrete examples. We accelerated the access to the Anacredit database for users from the data set containing detailed information on individual bank loans in the euro area, enables us to analyze the flow of credit to firms or the impact of debt moratoria and public guarantees on the banking sector. Anacredit is therefore crucial to improve our understanding of bank situation and the monetary policy transmission mechanism. we also introduced changes in the data collection related to our targeted longer-term refinancing operations, the TLTROs. In those operations, more favorable lending conditions are offered to banks meeting a predefined lending threshold. For this purpose, we amended the collection of data to be able to measure banks' lending performance. The calibration of our asset purchase programs relied on data from our centralized securities database. Based on granular data, we generated daily data on gross issuances, redemptions, and outstanding amounts of government bonds for euro area countries. The numerous COVID-19 related government interventions also necessitated additional data in the field of government finance statistics. To address this challenge, Eurostat and the ESCB, the European System of Central Banks, proactively joined efforts to design a single reporting template. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Eurostat for our excellent collaboration on various issues during the pandemic. Furthermore, the pandemic brought about specific challenges for our data production. Due to new and untested transition to teleworking, not only at the ECB, but also at our reporting agents, procedures had to be adjusted to reduce reporting burdens in these challenging times. This implied a reduction in the reporting frequency for data that was considered less critical for dealing with the pandemic. On the supervisory side, a full-scale stress test was postponed and replaced by a top-down vulnerability analysis. But such emergency measures come at the cost of reduced data availability. The pandemic also exposed more clearly the gaps in the EU's existing data infrastructure and a certain lack of standardization and integration. Let me highlight 3 specific examples from our user perspective. First, we still lack granular and timely data on some aspects of the labor market. For example, a monthly measure of labor market slack compiled by the ESS would be important to assess the economic impact of the ongoing pandemic. During the crisis, unemployment figures alone were not sufficient to interpret labor market dynamics, particularly given that many individuals have transitioned into inactivity and are thus not classified as unemployed. Second, we require more timely data relating to business demography, especially on the birth and death of enterprises. Such information would allow for more accurate assessment of how the pandemic is affecting the real economy. Third, the partial breakdown of supply chains during the pandemic once again highlighted the need to better understand the activities of multinational enterprises. The activities of these companies, such as the reshoring of supply chains in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, directly impact key national macroeconomic variables. A centralized and timely collection of data relating to the largest multinational enterprises in the euro area could improve our insights into the transmission and amplification of economic shocks across countries. Data collected under the current reporting systems should already now be exchanged and shared among statistical compilers to be able to follow M&E activities across borders and avoid gaps and duplications. This would be supported by putting obligatory unique identifiers in place and link our registers across trusted statistical institutions in the euro area. Let me conclude. The COVID-19 pandemic has served as a stark reminder that timely and high-quality data are essential for robust policy decisions. Therefore, the identified data gaps should be addressed with high priority. An increased openness of statistical authorities to the release of experimental data could contribute to filling data gaps exposed by the pandemic crisis. For example, the use of existing official registers would allow experimental statistics on enterprise growth to be collected relatively rapidly. The crisis has also reminded us of the value of constructive collaboration between the ESS and the ESCB, which will remain crucial in the future and should be further extended. I'm very much looking forward to addressing these and other issues during today's panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for this very lively and knowledgeable introduction into our topic. And you already touched on many of the key issues. I mean, I'm also in particular very happy that we have here a user-producer panel. I feel Dominik from Poland, who is of course my peer and friend as a head of a statistical office, and I do represent on the one side the statistical community, and the other panelists represent more the user community. But Professor Schnabel has already pointed out that sometimes the division of user and producer is also not so clear anymore in this modern world. So may I then immediately pass on to Professor Feld for his introductory remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Steinfest. I hope that you hear me, that you understand me, and that everything is working fine. So I am a member of the German Council of Economic Experts since 2011, and meanwhile also the chairman. And our interest as a user has always been to get more information on the economy first. Second, to have the information in real time. Third, to have granular data, to get not only more information as such, but have stronger differentiations into the micro level. And Isabel Schnabel has already highlighted many of these questions, in particular the retile problem that we faced during the corona pandemic to a large extent, when we in March of this year, not much data was available yet. We could only have a closer look at sentiment data. The sentiment data included some of the corona information, but other available data did not. And in that situation, it is very difficult to say how the economy is going to develop. You can only try to calculate different scenarios. It's impossible to have a proper forecast. And therefore, I could also add in particular on the sectors that are particularly affected by such a pandemic. But before I make a remark in that direction, I would like to emphasize the trade-offs that exist there in several respects. And I think that we need to have improvements in several of these regards in order to be sure that we finally end up with more and better real-time data in several dimensions. We discuss at length the bureaucratic costs that affect especially medium and small sized firms. And the statistical requirements usually belong to these bureaucratic costs. So we also have to have in mind that we do not simply add to these costs, but also find ways of improving the reporting facilities, not only adding additional reporting requirements, but have further reporting facilities. And this comes to my second point that I want to emphasize in these trade-offs. That's the digitalization question. What we've realized during the corona pandemic is to what large extent, in particular, the public sector is lagging behind in digitalization. When you think about the public administration, when you think about the health sector, or when you think about education, schools, and so on, digitalization is a strong problem in these areas. And we definitely need improvements in that regard. And this would also help us reduce the bureaucratic costs and therefore get real-time data much more quickly. We are meanwhile accustomed to the fact that there is a weekday figure in the reporting of the corona cases in Germany that we have to compare Sunday with the Sunday the week before, and not simply look at day-to-day changes. And this is something that's mainly due to the fact that there is a lag in the public administration reporting these data. The third point I would like to emphasize is something that is usually affecting us in international data comparison activities, but also within a country where you have a certain kind of decentralization. And we know in Germany in particular, but also in other federations, that the Federal Statistical Office is one part of this exercise, but we have state statistical offices on the other side, and their reporting is usually to some extent problematic, at least to the extent that there is an insufficient comparability. What I could say with respect to the corona pandemic in particular, that some of the real-time data, whether this is transport data that is available or energy consumption and so on, helped us as a real-time information to assess the state of the economy. But what has been particularly lacking is information on the services sector. There, the largest gap exists still. Isabel mentioned the labor data on the labor market that needs to be available much more in time. I would say even in Germany, even the labor market data provided by the Federal Labor Office has been faster than information on the services sector and the state of the services sector. And during this pandemic, this was particularly important to get data from services. I think I've finished my brief remarks in the beginning, my introductory remarks here, in order to be able to discuss several of these topics during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I always like when somebody introduces the idea of cost of data production, because what we are doing is also subject to a cost-benefit analysis in a statistical operation. And you pointing out that the public sector sometimes lags behind in digitalization, I can tell you, as somebody who works in the public sector, I can only confirm this. And we did have to, in a jolt, adjust to the new situation also in the UN Statistics Division. Well, now we get for the first time the voice of another statistician. So Dominic, good morning from New York, and I give you the floor for your introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I'm indeed representing Statistics Poland, which is a national statistical institute. At the moment, I'm also chairing PG, which is, the partnership group of the European statistical system. It's kind of like a bureau of the system, and I'm a vice chair at the CSSP in OECD, and as well as in SAS and UNECE. From this context, I guess I have a quite good overview of what have been done in NSIs across the world. And before going into a detailed discussion, there's one thing that I'd like to stress at the beginning. I think it's extremely important, is that I've seen a tremendous amount of a very agile approach to collaboration at the international level. When the pandemic started in March, we met nearly every day in different international forums, and we've been discussing in depth all the issues that most of us challenged at our national levels. And I guess that really is a good example of or indication even that our systems are really kind of like responsible and they can act quickly and in an agile way, creating the fundamentals of the future of official statistics, because this is really an unprecedented crisis that really makes us to reconsider a lot of our limitations or practices from the past. And just to mention a few, COVID has been a test of our resilience and agileness. And what we've done, I guess, one of the major, answers to it was quickly developing or using more experimental statistics, which we see as a way to overcome the trade-off in between the timeliness and quality. The only issue that we tried to solve at the moment was also the issue of comparability, because when we quickly come up with the new ideas for the surveys, you need to make sure that you're quite similar with the other countries, as it was mentioned already, in order to sustain at least a small chance to compare the results, to have a deeper insight. And then, of course, the issue of communication was extremely important, and it's not only limited to the, something that we discuss very often, which is fake news, or I coined the term also fake research, which also starts to happen. It's also the issue of reaching out to the very wide audience in a way that is really understandable for the public, and thus serving our basic, responsibilities in terms of creating the information market of the democratic society. Strategically, of course, we have to tackle with disturbances and irregularities. This is like, we have some established models, but probably those models need to change some of the assumptions, and we have to tackle with this problem. Socioeconomic processes are different during the crisis than during the outside the crisis. User needs have been mentioned already. They're always growing, and we have to be very selective in terms of what we are there for and what we can deliver. And of course, new data sources, tools, methods, technologies, but especially access to new data sources, also those privately held, is extremely important if we want to sustain the ability of the democratic society to be well informed and not only in the crisis but in the future generally. So it is interesting to observe how differently somehow or similarly the NSIs across the world are reacting. This is going to be an extremely interesting material for us to analyze after the crisis. That there are 4 dimensions of reactions, like products, processes, communication, and strategies. I can tell you what we've done, like, very quickly. We wanted to act as soon as possible. We started with the short-term statistics, quick monthly statistics. We extended the scope of our surveys so that we didn't take the approach of having one survey related to COVID, rather than we were trying to improve all the surveys in the context of COVID, so that researchers after month, quarter, year, will get additional insight into what has been happening in the socioeconomic processes. So we wanted to go as deep as possible and across all statistical domains, focus on both current and future user, especially researcher needs. And of course, at that time, it was extremely important to strengthen our role as a data steward for the administration, as we were trying to help as much as possible to produce all the information needed for all the other ministries. I guess that was a very important point of our reaction. But this is just very briefly for the beginning. Thank you very much.
Much, Dominique, and also for confirming my point that we have moved together as an international community and tried to find solutions together, rather than everybody reinventing the wheel in their particular corner. We just continue the introductory remarks, and it's now my pleasure to give the floor to Professor Benasikere. Hello, you have the floor.
See the faces of my old friends, Isabel and Lars. I had a few slides, but I understand that this is not time to show slides, so maybe I will describe them, or you can show them. I don't know. I wanted to, oh yes, fantastic. So I wanted to give the point of view of a in economics, and as such I have been doing research with data, but today I'm a chief economist and I'm doing forecasting and policy and advice to policy making with this, the data too. And during this crisis we've been using intensively 4 types of data: the national accounts, of course, survey data, high frequency data, and micro data. And I will give a few examples of that in 2 areas: forecasting first and then policymaking. So forecasting in times of crisis is extremely difficult. So I just show a few hints on how we've done in practice. So this is the graph we've been using for the second lockdown in November. So in this graph, during a lockdown, what is most important for forecasting is not the usual macroeconomic relationships between consumption, savings, investments, so on. It's more the constraints faced at the sector level. So here you have a graph where on the horizontal axis you have the impact of the first lockdown on the different sectors, and on the vertical axis our assessment at the beginning of the lockdown of what would be the impact of the lockdown. And to do this, we've relied on a survey, high-frequency, monthly survey of the Ministry of Labor, which is called ASEMO COVID survey with the firms, asking them many questions, but some of also the nature of the restrictions to the activity, whether it's that it's closed, whether that there's lack of demand or lack of supply or whatever. To the first one, we were able to assess what could be the impact of the second lockdown. So for instance, on this graph, you see on the southwest of the graph, accommodation and food service activities, which obviously were severely hit by the first lockdown and equivalently second lockdown. But for other activities, and especially construction, for instance, the first lockdown was very severe, but the second one much less, because the firms in these sectors said during the first lockdown what they was restricted by the lack of supply of both inputs and also masks and more generally protections for the workers, which was something that had been fixed before the second lockdown. So this is how we did, so relying very heavily on the experience of the first lockdown, so the impact on activity in the first lockdown, and with the help of the survey. Next, please. So another example is the use of credit cards, and to have so credit cards give a very quick assessment of the impact of the restrictions. So here you have the first lockdown, the impact on consumption through the credit cards. So you see, for instance, that for food, which is the black line, there is hardly any impact of the lockdown. But for other sectors, you have a very, very steep drop in consumption. And we can see very quickly the differences across sectors. So this gives us also a way to assess which sector needs most some support. And then there is after the lockdown, we see the very, very steep recovery in some sectors. So equipment of the households and also government, but not so much. So more slowly for restaurants, but still over the summer we see that the restaurants were at the level of the pre-crisis level. So this is extremely valuable information for the forecasting and also for the policy making. And at the end of the graph, you see the second lockdown, which has a very severe impact on the sectors, but more differentiated compared to the first one. So there is an adaptation of the consumer, and we can factor this in the forecast. Next, please. So the INSEE, the Statistical Institute, has recently published this fascinating graph, which is the correlation between the loss of activity compared to Q4 of 2019, and an index based on Google mobility data. And this is the lack of mobility, actually. It's a residential immobility. And you show very, very close relationships. So it's fascinating. It's a bit in a sense puzzling, because of the development of telework, which should support activity despite people with electricity consumption, which is very strong. Maybe I will go to the next one immediately. And in order to provide some, so next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. So this is a bit confusing graph. So it's still the impact of the first lockdown on the horizontal axis, and the impact of the second lockdown on the vertical axis, but here on high frequency data. not on activity of the sectors, but on high frequency data. And if you just look at the blue dots, which has only different measures of mobility, they are all around the graph. So these high frequency data are useful on the one hand. On the other hand, their reliability is really doubtful, so they should be used with some caution. Next, please. Then I move to the policy making. So what we've been doing, we have used micro data very intensively. I show you here an example where we took the balance sheets of the firms. So the first exercise was done with 2017 and 2017 balance sheets, and we've redone the exercise recently with 2018 balance sheets. We don't have, of course, the 2019 balance sheet for all the firms in France. So there are 3.6 million firms in France. We only looked at small firms, small and medium-sized firms that were viable before the crisis. And we've simulated the sector level COVID shock on these firms, and we've simulated the take-up of government support. And then we've calibrated the capital shortfall, and this has been the basis for the equity-like injection program that is going to be disclosed in a few weeks. Next, please. On the demand side, we have looked also at consumption based on, so this is a work by the French Council of Economic Analysis, and they've done a partnership with a bank to look at the accounts of the households and to have an idea of the drop in consumption per decile. So these are not deciles of income, they are deciles of consumption pre-crisis, because they don't have income actually. And so we see the fall, and like in what has been shown in the US, the fall is steeper for the wealthiest, which is because they have more entertainment in their consumption basket. And then the recovery, and we see that the more modest households overshoot after lockdown, so there is a catching up effect. So this is very useful actually to calibrate the kind of support to households we have to deliver in order to support consumption, and especially how to calibrate to the lower end of the income schedule. Next, please. So policy making is also has also to do with how the information is transmitted to the beneficiaries, but also to the general public. And here I show a website which has been put in place to inform the public, the general public, about who benefits from, so not individually, but in terms of regions, in terms of types of firms, in terms of sectors, who benefits the different support mechanisms, and in real time. So this is also something that has been produced. A lot of effort is put also on the evaluation, with a fantastic work that is being made in order to match the data, the micro data I've just mentioned before, with how the firms have been using actually the support mechanism. And so far they have done some stylized, some descriptive statistics, but this will be instrumental to the ex post evaluation that is going to be made later on. So I would like to thank you for your attention. I just wanted, yes, to at the beginning of the discussion, to give some practical insights on how we've done through the crisis in terms of forecast and policy making based on traditional data and for new data. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. And there's nothing as appealing as a concrete example or a slide to show what is really happening. So I think people can already get an impression of what a high-powered panel we have here and what kind of wisdom and knowledge and experience is here in this room. And to conclude the round around the table, I want to give the floor to Mr. Palmieri for his introductory remarks.
Thanks and good morning, everybody. I would like first to thank the organizer for inviting me to this high-level conference. As you introduced me, I represent the European Economic and Social Committee. The committee is the house of the European civil society, gathering representatives from different economic and social partner and civil society organizations and offering them a platform to express their point of view on European issues. The AEC is an advisory body for the European Commission, Parliament and the Council to support the EU decision-making closer to the needs of citizens. For our role, the availability of data is fundamental. As I told you, we are a consultative body and we come from different experience and position. There are employers, farmers, and social economy representatives, and so on. For example, I'm an economist for the Italian trade union, the CGL, and for different dossiers, we must find a common position in institution. In this activity, data are crucial for us because support us to find the point where our different positions tend to converge in a common view. I'm very thankful to the German presidency for organizing this event. High quality information of data is the most important basis for fact-based decision, and this is much more important in time of crisis. Cooperation at the European level in statistics is crucial, both for the immediate post-COVID recovery, as well as for the building long-term resilience, as the Next Generation EU program will try to do in the next years. Our committee firmly believes that in the next year we will face a huge challenge to guarantee an European recovery, and in the meantime, we should be able to make a structural transformation of our economic model with a double transition in the digital and green economy. And all that we should do to ensure a more sustainable and inclusive future. For this task, the availability of dashboard with economic, social, and environmental indicators will be fundamental. And I welcome the German presidency proposal for the creation of the new European dashboard. But let me say one thing that should drive our discussion, I hope. Never like today, we have a huge amount of data and information, but the problem is how to turn this huge amount of information into real knowledge for everybody. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to all of you for your introductory remarks. I think it gives us a good panorama of who you are and where you are coming from this table. To this table, let me remind the audience that we will hopefully have a little bit of time at the end to answer questions. So if anybody of the audience out there has any questions, could you please perhaps send them in through the chat, and my colleagues in Destatis will help me to get your questions. I would also encourage our panel members, if they wish to refer to each other in order to make the discussion a lot more lively, or to pick up on an example of one of your colleagues, to do so, or even ask questions mutually. I think that will make a much more interesting discussion. We will have, due to the richness of the experience and views that you bring to the table, a time management problem. I think in your introductory remark, many of you have already actually touched on the topic number one that we wanted to talk about, which is the need for new data and the innovation that has taken place in terms of perhaps producing new data or using existing information more smartly. I would just like to spend perhaps a few minutes just to go around the table again, and simply, if you have any things that you would like to expand on these points, that questions, what are new data needs that emerged in the crisis, and what innovative data sources have you seen that could be used, or what could even be done more? Very briefly, perhaps touch on this, and then we will move on to the other topics. So perhaps we can just go in that same order around the table again and see whether you have any additional remarks with respect to this first topic, new data demands in the crisis.
Yeah, so thank you very much. By the way, just call me Isabel. I think in an English-speaking conference, so that's fine. I would like to add a bit to what Agnes presented very nicely, and actually Lars also mentioned it, which is the use of high-frequency data, which of course for us was also crucial in this crisis. And I think we have to acknowledge that this crisis is something that we hadn't seen before. So we had very limited understanding how this crisis works, whether it's a demand side shock or a supply side shock, or what kind of behavioral changes we would see. And therefore, all our nowcasting exercises had to be adjusted. And then there was a special feature that was also mentioned by Lars, that actually the services sector was much more strongly affected than in normal recessions. And therefore, actually, we were using a very similar data as Agnes mentioned. So, of course, the credit card payments were our analysis found very similar, I think, to what Agnes said, that mobility indicators are a bit less useful than the credit card payments. And actually, I mean, the credit card payments, what is nice about them is that they really capture actual spending. And so they are very useful. We also use the consumption of key inputs like energy. I mean, we looked at, in order to capture global conditions, we looked at shipping conditions, packaging, things like that. And something that I would also like to add is that we were moving more towards textual analysis. So especially in order to capture labor market development. So for example, we were using LinkedIn hiring rates as an indicator of the number of job hires. We were using job postings from the portal Indeed as a proxy for changes in labor demand. We were using like textual analysis to get an indication of how many applications were there for job retention schemes, and then with respect to price developments, we have actually set up a network, the Prisma network, that some of you may know, which is also used based on very detailed data like scanner data and so on. And this is important, for example, to analyze things like a VAT change, as it has happened in Germany, and to see how this impacts economic data. So let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's go on directly to Professor Fell.
Yeah, like Isabel, I can say, please call me Lars. I would like to make two remarks in addition to what has already been said. First of all, I find it very important that Agnes has emphasized a trade-off that we have to keep in mind when we are talking about real-time data and high-frequency data. That is the trade-off regarding the reliability of the data. So when she was talking about mobility aspects, for example, the reliability could be questioned, for example. That's the first remark. So we must always have in mind also this the additional trade-offs that we have to solve somehow. Second, I would like to say to my knowledge, what I know from the Federal Statistical Office, that some information is available there internally, but not available for users. For example, advanced indication of for the value-added tax, for example. This information would have helped us as well to see what is going on in different areas of the services sector. Or regarding mobility, we have been very happy to see mobility indicators for streets, but not mobility. But we are not so happy that we didn't see any mobility indicators for the railways. So this would be important to get the additional information also as a user when it is already available in-house. Regarding the services sector, well, of course, I know of the many problems there, but I should say, nevertheless, that the information we have on self-employed people, in particular, if these are single persons, or if we have smallest firms, they usually are not covered by the traditional methods. The questionnaires are usually not sent out to them to the same extent as to others, so we don't have a really representative sample there. This micro-level information is important, in particular in such a crisis as we are now with the COVID-19. But I'm also aware of the fact that it's difficult to get this data. So I'm sure that it's not easy to do, but somehow we must find out whether we have additional methods to use in that regard. So when you think about restaurants and bars and clubs, the information that is important to get there on their turnover or value added that they create, this would be very important to get. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for offering me to use the first name. I'm making a whole group of new friends here, and that makes my job a lot easier. So let me continue in that vein. And with Dominic, of course, who is my peer, we have been on a first name basis for many, many years. Dominic, you are a chief statistician. You just heard from Lars and from some of the users that two things are happening. They are knocking on your door and saying you have data that we sometimes cannot access, or they go somewhere else and get data that do not come from the National Statistical Office. So what does that make you feel like? I mean, how do you respond to that?
Thank you very much, Stefan. So first, I would like to say, don't go anywhere else. Just come to us. We will try to be as open and as transparent as it is possible. I think that there are some crucial points in that I'll address at the end of what I plan to say now, just for a minute. But there are some issues still in terms of having the right access to data sources that will be useful and necessary for official statistics to produce an important information that is needed by researchers, by politicians, by society as a large, and we need to overtake those limitations somehow. We need to have a clear debate about that. I'm not only telling about, but this is also an important example. Most of us, across countries, have already secured the access to administrative data. But is that deep enough? Is that timely enough? That's one of that. These are the issues that we have to tackle with. But then the most important issue at the moment is access to privately held data. And I can tell you, we can get access to very important sources that are at the heart of analyzing what is happening during a crisis like that. For example, we can access mobility data from the telecoms. We can access the already mentioned payment data from the banks. What happens in Poland actually is that the banks themselves, they have some analytical teams. They go around and brag about producing statistics based on the access they have internally to payment data. Is that right as at the level of the society? when it may be a crucial information for society and for politicians to create development strategies. I guess these are the issues that have to be solved somehow, as statistical offices traditionally had the right to send the questionnaire. Just imagine that this is kind of like an old version, a new version of sending the questionnaire, that you need to submit some data sets that will allow us to do our job. And I can tell you, if we are allowed to do it, we can do the best work possible, because we and only we are allowed to link data from different sources and take advantage, create a value added out of the fact that we can link different sources at the very granular level and then produce an in-depth analysis of processes. I can tell you just by example that where we can, we do, and satellite imagery and the usage of it and statistics is a good example, as we have a lot of public sources, public programs, Copernicus in terms of European Union, that supply us with the necessary material. More and more NSIs are investing heavily into producing statistics based on satellite imagery, and I guess it's, just to sum up, it's a challenge for us all. What kind of official statistics do we want to have in the future? Whether we want to really invest in society's capacity, which takes the form of official statistics, to be informed, to produce the necessary information. I think that there are many relevant topics to discuss in the coming months, coming years, in terms of how we want to organize the whole process. But I can tell you that we've been trying to do whatever possible using all the necessary sources, and I think an experimental statistics has proved recently very effective, and it really allowed us to some degree also overcome this trade-off and between timeliness, quality, and comparability or harmonization across the countries. And I guess we all agree, we already had a meeting yesterday, also thanks to a German presidency, which was extremely important, and we all agreed that what we want to have is a clear innovation agenda for the coming years, as this is pushing the whole system to the very new level, and I'm very glad that I'm part of this process.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for a very passionate and powerful statement of my favorite term these days is now the national statistical offices as data stewards. And I often say that the old model of a national statistical office was a pure goods and service provider, because I mean they do not only provide their own data, they provide other data filtered through a quality assurance process. So this is a completely new image and task and role for national statistical offices, and this is of course a very exciting debate taking place in our professional community. Agnes, I hope I can say, I'm allowed to say, Agnes, do you have any thoughts? You're coming from an academic and policy background on this debate on data gaps and how can we best fill them?
Thanks, Stefan. I would like first to stress the importance of statistical institutes to provide reliable data. I think that today we are in a very, very specific situation with, well, we've experienced a drop of activity by 30% in just 1 week in March. So this is unseen in economic history. So I think this is why we had to rely on alternative data. But here it's important, especially after the crisis, to come back to statistical institutes, because you know, we are also in a world of alternative reality. So credible statistical institutes with using international accounting standards, transparent methodologies, this is extremely important, and we should protect the independence of the statistical institutes and their methodologies as really a public good. Now, what was specific during this crisis was the combination of high uncertainty and a massive economic shock. This is why we had to rely more on real-time data and granular data. I would like to stress on also this. There's a huge heterogeneity across households, across firms, and we had to dig into this heterogeneity in order to provide appropriate support. Now, if you ask me, because here I understand I can shop for new data, so if you ask me about the gaps, I would say mainly three. One is we understand now that there will be some massive reallocation, not just of jobs, but also of capital. And also there could be capitalization of, so if you want to have an idea of whether a shock is temporary or permanent, a way to do so would be to look at real estate data, because normally the future is capitalized in the real estate prices, and here we really lack reliable data on commercial real estate, shops, offices, malls, hotels. We really lack comprehensive data on these areas. Second area where we lack high-frequency data is everything about poverty. I've shown some data about consumption, but on the income side, we lack real-time data, especially since this crisis has hit very severely the small jobs. Think about students who have also a job, and which can be formal or informal, and these jobs have suddenly disappeared. Of course, we lack data on informality. So in a sense, we are facing same kind of problems as developing countries, where part of the problem comes from areas you cannot measure. And the third gap, I would say, is the network effects of the crisis. Isabel mentioned the data gaps for multinationals, the activity of multinationals. But in a sense, the whole economy is a multinational with supply chains which are national and international. And we have made a lot of progress in terms of supply chains, but from input-output perspective. So for accounting, national accounting perspective, but not so much at the level of the firm. So we would need some more granular data about the network effects, and whether we should, for instance, from a policy perspective, whether we should direct the support to special nodes of the economy which have a very high multiplier in terms of maintaining the whole network of firms alive. So, of course, for this crisis, it will probably be too late, but this is an area where maybe there should be some work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for confirming that we as national statistical officers still have a chance to survive, that we are still needed, and perhaps after the crisis even more so. I very much liked your presentation of how in a crisis moment you did go elsewhere, but at the end of the day, when things are going back to normal, you need your national statistical office that fulfills a number of important functions. Of course, Stefano, I'm very happy to use your first name because it's a very nice first name from my perspective. So could I offer you the floor for your thoughts on this remark, on this round of discussion?
Yes, thanks, Stefan. For example, during the first wave of pandemic crisis, in my committee, we conducted a survey that was part of an opinion related to European Commission communication on tourism and transport in 2020 and beyond. And the work were made during the first wave of the pandemic crisis with all the difficulty. It was due to the lack of data on the development and the situation of tourist business during the crisis that we launched an online questionnaire in order to help define the proposal included in the opinion. Also because usually we prepare our report, our opinion in 2 months, so we haven't much more time to wait to reach data from the official statistics sometime. The online questionnaire was composed of 15 questions. It was open during the month of August, and the questionnaire was widely shared among tourism organizations across Europe, including hotel, restaurant, transport service, leisure, industry, and so on. We received 175 replies. We asked to the respondents how the sector they represented was affected by pandemic crisis, whether they expected the short-term and long-term consequences, and so on. But we also asked them to elaborate what policy priority they see for the tourism sector, because the question was close and open. Clearly, this questionnaire was not prepared with the intention to replace the official statistics. It's aimed to complement for the purpose of preparing our opinion and give us a snapshot on how the tourism organization felt during the pandemic crisis in a more flexible and quicker way that we need in the moment of our elaboration of the opinion. But I want to underline 2 points that Mrs. Benassi-Queré mentioned. About the gap, I feel the importance to analyze and investigate the gray area of the informal economy or black economy and the employment that work in this sector, but also the precarious employment that are not in the formal employment circle. And I think that we need to investigate how during this 2 wave of the pandemic crisis, this informal employment, what is the dynamic of this informal employment and the worker inside this sector? Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I, as a moderator, I'm also the timekeeper, and this is a very unpleasant job, especially if you have such a high-powered panel and there are so many interesting things to be shared. So let me make perhaps 1 or 2 executive decisions here and announcements now. We did get the signal from the organizers that we can definitely go for about 15 minutes over the panel time. But I mean, to get there, I would like to combine themes 2 and 3 now in the next round as we go around the table, so that we do have perhaps still the time to take 1 or 2 questions from the audience. And then at the very end, I would like to give everybody a final of discussion. So you will get 30 seconds at the very end of your file. So those are the rules of the game. So we will go 1 more time around the table here, and I will combine the teams 2, which was the dilemma between accuracy and timeliness. We have touched on it already in many forms. So if you have any additional thoughts on this topic about the dilemma between accuracy and timeliness, quality and timeliness, And at the same time, if you have any thoughts, you know, from the keynote addresses, there is this proposal or this plan of creating a European dashboard. If you have some thoughts about whether this dashboard is a good thing or how it has to be designed in order to be useful for your perspective. So if you could cover these two topics, please, in the next round, and hopefully we can still keep it to only like around 3 minutes per person, then we would still have the possibility to open the floor for questions, and you can already think about your final statement at the very end, which will have to be a bullet, quick summary of your most important message. So let's go around the table again. Isabel, any thoughts on the conflict accuracy, timeliness, and any proposals, ideas, concerns about the European dashboard?
Okay, so I try to be quick. So on the first point, I would like to come back to one point that Lars made in his introductory statement, which is the issue of the reporting burden, which for us is actually a very important one. I mean, as you know, I mean, the largest part of the data that we are collecting is actually coming from banks, and banks have to report, I mean, to many authorities, and often they have to report very similar things. And so we are working very intensively on reducing the reporting burdens for our reporting agents while ensuring an adequate quality. And we very strongly support the European initiatives towards a more integrated reporting framework. And actually, this is one of the big projects that we are running at the moment. And we've just recently contributed to what is called the European Banking Authority feasibility report, which is dealing with this goal to reduce the reporting burden for the banks. And what I would like to stress is that this is very much about defining standard data dictionaries, about defining common data models, about designing smarter procedures, and also about enhancing cooperation. And I would think that if we can manage to get to a higher efficiency in the data collection process, this will actually also improve the timeliness of the data, and not just at the regular reporting dates, but actually also when we have such ad hoc requests as we have now quite a bit in the pandemic. So I just wanted to point to this important project. The second point was on the ESS recovery dashboard. So I think this is an excellent initiative. I think it's very important. I mean, in the dashboard, you flag that there are certain indicators to be developed, and I think this should be done as quickly as possible, especially in the areas that I already mentioned in my introductory remarks. I think, as Stefan said many times, we should rely more on experimental data in a first step, and then follow up with more robust data at a later stage. I think it should be made sure that the data is disseminated in an efficient way, and I think what is very important is that this data is also made available to the general public. I understand that this is actually planned, but whoever knows more about that, I would be very interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being super executive and keeping to the time. Lars, you are next.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't have to add much to what Isabel said. I fully agree with her. So just to add another perspective on that, the bureaucratic costs that arise for banks in your example, in order to get timely data, is that they have to report several times to several different authorities, and also give their data to several different authorities. It would be very nice and fine to see that we have a kind of harmonization of the information requirements, the different producers of the information finally have to undergo. So this is something that we have to keep in mind, and it also helps us to a certain extent to have a higher comparability of the different data, the different data sources that we look at. This also is very important in that regard. So I think the trade-off between timeliness and reliability is something that has been emphasized several times now on this panel. And I don't want to add more to that. I just want to pick up one thing which is very, very difficult to get. This is the informality part. We always have some parts of the economy which are informal, where there is some avoidance and evasion activity that people don't want to report. And we must arrive at methods to get better information in that respect. I know that this is not easily available in time, but still, at least having an improvement regarding the quality of the data in that area of the economy is quite important.
Thank you very much, Lars, and thank you for this very constructive proposal to zoom in on the most vulnerable elements of the information system and try to improve them, and thus lessen a little bit the trade-off between quality accuracy on the one side and timeliness on the other side. Dominic, this dilemma between timeliness and accuracy is probably something that keeps you from sleeping many nights. So any thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, it indeed keeps me from sleeping, but at the same time, I see, in the current context that we can really hope for the better future. And what I can say here is that the problem that we have, that we are being seen through the perspective of the past solutions that we have applied to this exact trade-off in between the timeliness and accuracy or quality to our traditional surveys. But nowadays we can see through the experimental statistics, through the use of new data sources, that we can, thanks to them, bring this game to a completely new level, and to some degree allowing us to overcome the limitations of the past and really improved in both dimensions. So the trade-off will stay, but will improve heavily, and really there's a lot of hope for that, and I guess we should deliver it. But in order to do so, we need to make sure that we create the necessary infrastructure. And there are two important issues here. Like we need to really invest in NSIs in terms of their IT capacity and the skills of people. And I'm very proud also to be involved in the work of the global working group under umbrella of you, Stefan, that we are working on the umbrella of under the umbrella of United Nations, where we are trying to develop, the schemes, the frameworks, the programs to teach people these new methods, big data, and very advanced statistical solutions. That's very good. That's one side of that. But of course, at the domestic level, you need to make sure that there is an appropriate infrastructure that the statisticians, these new generations of statisticians, can use, data scientists, as we like to call them nowadays. And then the second dimension is that we need to update the legal frameworks. Like we're trying to affect the legal frameworks here in Europe in terms of the recent talks on the regulations, like on EU data spaces, high-value data sets, privacy. Hopefully, we'll also kind of change the statistical regulation in order to get the wider access to the necessary sources of data. And of course, the third solution to it that we stress more and more often among us is that we need to integrate more with the academia and to really be a catalyst also for academia to make them to do the analysis thanks to data that we can collect from different sources and really engage them into our processes. This is certainly one of the solutions. And just finally, in terms of dashboard, I can tell you in our experience, there was one of the big companies, well-known name, who was proposing to one of the ministries here in Poland at the beginning of the pandemic to create the dashboard. I can tell you, before they settled the talks, we have already, as an NSI, delivered the dashboard. Everybody was happy, and I'm very enthusiastic in terms of what the German presidency, together with Eurostat, is preparing, because I think we need the European dashboard as well, and I know it's going to be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and you're certainly part of the crew or the team, the construction team for the dashboard. So, and you can already hear that there's very positive reception from the user side. Agnes?
Thank you. Perhaps first a word on the reporting burden and then the dashboard. On the reporting burden, I think this is a very serious issue. We've tried to do some improvement in France with a single social declaration where firms have on social topics they have only to declare once, and this is hard data about employees, and then they won't be asked the same question a second time. But then, as you mentioned, there are these surveys, and this can be quite a burden for small firms. So this is really an issue. Also, I should mention that when government support was decided, that there was also a trade-off between the burden for the firms and the targeting of the support. So it was decided, for instance, in France with the Solidarity Fund to go for something extremely simple. But then you have firms for which it will not be enough, and firms for which it's too much. So it's less smart, but it's more simple. And then there is really the trade-off between simplicity, so it's swift, and more intelligent framework, which would probably be better, but would take more time and would impose a heavier burden for the firms. So in Germany, I think I've seen that it's also the trade-off that has been very, very present in the discussions. Now the dashboard, I think we need to be very clear about the objective of the dashboard. If the objective is to provide a common diagnosis of the economy at one glance, it's really very welcome. It needs to be small, so to remain with a number of key indicators. It needs to be also acknowledged that the waves of the epidemic are not necessarily simultaneous in the different countries, so we should be aware of that. And then, if the objective is to do some evaluation, then it may be too ambitious. When I look at the discussions here, how to evaluate the support to the economy, the emergency support, and then the recovery plan, and how data consuming, how data intensive it will be, I'm a bit skeptical whether you can do it directly cross-border approach with a cross-border approach. And also, I think it's very, very valuable to show the same indicator in the different countries, but they will show correlations, and the interpretation may be tricky. I give it one example, which is the air quality index. So the air quality index may be doing well just before because there is no recovery, or because the recovery is a greener recovery. So we should be very cautious about releasing this kind of data without the key to how to read them and how to interpret them. There's a causality issue. Obviously, there's a causality issue. So in brief, I think that it's very welcome, very useful to provide a consistent picture of the economy, and we should be very careful, because when we have a European initiative, it's very often that each country wants to have its own input in the initiative, and then you end up with something that is too complicated. So we need to be very careful about that, not to replicate the same information in different forms to help readability. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. And last but certainly not least, Stefano, your thoughts on this trade-off, and also perhaps some comments on the proposed European dashboards.
Thanks, Stefan. I think that this current crisis highlighted that timeliness is not only an issue for data production, but also for presentation and communication. And by this way, all of that massive flow of information to turn into direct knowledge for users. Let me remark that we can have two typologies of data user. The usual suspect, the data professional around this virtual table, and the absolute beginner, the citizen that should to have the right to follow what happens in the society where they live, follow the dynamics of the various phenomena in a transparent and absolutely understandable way. There is a very big difference between how data can be presented to the professional user and how it should be presented to people, with only look at official statistics on an occasional basis without statistic professionality. If there was one thing that this crisis clearly showed is that citizens all over Europe suddenly started to look for data. I think that we should dedicate more attention to the modern data visualization method to make data easily understandable for those who are less statistically literate. About the dashboard, I think that the dashboard would have to serve mainly two purposes. From an ex-ante perspective, it needs to provide valuable information for decision maker to formulate appropriate policy objective with clear target and measures. On the other side, it should be help monitor the achievement made. Another point very important is that the dashboard should have a geographical dimension. As you know, for some country, the national average of one indicator could give a partial information. Much more important could be the regional indicators at the level of Eurostat NAS2, for example. Another point is that should be analyzed the possible interrelation between the dashboard and the European semester process, a framework for coordinating reform at the European level. At the origin of the European semester was designed as macroeconomic governance tool, but during the course of its evolution, social and sustainability elements were included and were designed a framework system of economic, social, and environmental indicators. And as you know, the semester process in the next year will gain an importance in monitoring and evaluate process of the investment and reform program of the national recovery and resilience plans. And this is, I think, could be very important to investigate. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for your insights and for also allowing me to combine these two themes and discussing on them. We have now about 15 minutes to take some questions from the audience, and then, as I said, we will give you a final round where, in a very short summary, you could perhaps highlight your main takeaways or suggestions. And of course, for wrapping up this really interesting event. Now, Stefano already mentioned nuts in his last remark. I mean, the territorial units, regional statistics, and that leads wonderfully into the first question. I mean, the importance of regional statistics and the uniformity of standards. I mean, and the need to implement standards in all European countries. So it seems that this is still a challenge, and I think somebody, Isabel, also mentioned before that a crisis highlights the issues of uniformity. And of course, if you work towards a dashboard, I mean, it is critically important that we are using the same language and the same standards. Does anybody have any views on this topic or would like to comment on the need to impose European standards more emphatically as a result of this crisis, and any specific examples? If anybody wishes to comment on this question, please let me know. Just say so. Anybody wishes to take this question on the needs for standardization, better standardization of, especially at the regional, also territorial units?
Well,
Lars, yes, thank you for breaking the ice.
Nobody wants to break the ice and make a remark in that respect. And the answer is straightforward. Of course, we need a comparability and standardization in order to ensure this comparability at the European level. And as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, this is also necessary in order to this is also necessary within countries when you think about the data that is available only on a decentralized level. And the question also highlights the problems that we have with respect to decentralization. When you want to have regional data or local data and information on that, it is very important to have a kind of standardization in that respect. So I would like to emphasize one element that could be important in that regard. When you think about comparability, standardization, bureaucratic costs that we want to minimize, and therefore well, it would be better to have questions on, well, the same types of data by different by different authorities that want to elicit this data, and you have the request for further digitalization in the future. And you can bring together all these four issues in some respect, or to some extent at least, when you improve the digitalization part, because as soon as it is sure that it is ensured that the relation between the authorities that require the information and those that have the information and want and need to provide it, or are required to provide it to them, as long as this is done with particular digital platforms available to these users and these information providers, then you also have to have a standardization in that respect. And this ensures some type of comparability, and it reduces bureaucratic costs. But something we have to keep in mind as well is, of course, there is also the question of data protection and data security on the other hand. And this is something we have to solve as well.
Thank you very much, and I think thanks for bringing up that point. It is true. Dominic, I saw your hand. I'll give you the floor in a second. Digitalization is the grand enforcer of standardization. I mean, obviously, when we put something on the computer, we have to be very disciplined in which form it is done. I also like how you often make reference to the trade-off and the cost aspect. And of course, what you just pointed out in the last message, I was transcending geography in a meeting in Mexico yesterday. It's nice that you can virtually travel one day to the other from different parts. And there was exactly a big conference on the trade-off between accessibility of information and individual data protection. So these are topics that are very much being discussed in this context also. Dominic, please, if you want to comment on this.
Just a very short comment. I mean, standardization and harmonization across the countries, and having a comparable statistics on a very granular levels across the whole Europe, independently from the borders, is an extremely important and practical issue. But I would like to raise its importance even higher. I would argue that this is one of the foundations of the European statistical system, and it's actually a guiding, principle of what we are here to do. And I would like to only stress even more that this is something that we should do always. And this is actually what was proposed recently as well, that we invest a lot into innovation and these kind of like new explorations in terms of experimental statistics. But even on that level, already from the beginning, we want to do as much harmonization as possible. And I would only say that this is a major, principle of what we are trying to achieve at the moment. I can tell you, we've been investing here in Poland a lot for many years into a topic of cross-border comparisons, and we even created a data bank of a cross-border, data bank in between Germany, Poland, and Czech Republic. And we've seen from our experience that there are still so many of the areas of statistics that would require a little bit of more harmonization in terms of getting the more comparable statistics. I guess certainly for me, but I know for many of my colleagues as well, this is going to be one of the priorities in the coming years.
Thank you very much, Dominique. Let me pick up a second question from the chat right now, and this is for Agnes. I think people have been impressed by your Google chart. That was, of course, impressive. That you were able to basically mimic an existing indicator through an external indicator. So perhaps you could say a few more words. And what are you going to do in the future with this Google index in comparison to official data or together? We heard earlier the terminology complementarity between big data, external, non-official data, and official data sources. And yes, the floor is yours.
Difficult question. I must say that this graph is not from the Treasury, it's from the Statistical Institute in SE, so you should maybe ask them what they intend to do with it. It's an example of a correlation, so it's very nice correlation, extremely nice correlation over just a few months. So whether it works also in normal times, where you have small variations in both indices, this is a big question. Whether it works also in out of sample, because this is ex post correlation, but in real time, can you use the Google e-mobility or residential mobility index to predict activity in the future? Probably not, because it's just nowcasting. So nowcasting is extremely useful in the crisis we are living in, because things are changing very fast and we need to adapt. In normal times, we do forecasting, but it's less critical, because the changes are not so large and you are not going to entirely change your policy depending on the nowcasting. So I would say that this graph shows the usefulness of Google mobility indices, although there is also a lot of noise with these indices, as I showed, and also Lars mentioned that. In a big crisis, in a crisis where things are extremely moving very fast and extremely uncertain, but in normal times, I'm not so sure of what we can do with it. And especially with, as I said, telework. Telework should be a way to decorrelate mobility with output. And it doesn't seem to be the case over these months, which is a bit of a puzzle. So it may be a coincidence. So I would not put too much weight on this correlation and say that the Google Mobility Index is the single index we should be using going forward.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for highlighting, I think, an interesting aspect of quality is fit for purpose. I mean, there may be an index, a piece of information, a data item that is particularly useful in one particular context, in a particular crisis situation, or in a particular country situation, but may not be useful in other contexts. And I think you nuanced and differentiated, and I think that is very important. And I think that is something of what I called the data culture at the very beginning. We all need to learn better There is no a priori good or bad data, but we need to be very clear about for which purposes certain items or signals can be used. Is there somebody else who would like to comment on this particular point? Isabel?
I will be very brief. I just wanted to support very strongly what Agnes said. So ECB staff has also done analysis on data. In this crisis, there are other indicators that work much better, like the card payments. But they have also done analysis on whether this could be useful at other times, in normal times, and our economists are quite skeptical about that. Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you very much for sharing that piece of information. Any other comments on this particular point? If not, then let me just invite you now. I think we are already almost 15 minutes over time, but I mean, it was certainly highly interesting and time was flying when you're having fun here. Let me give you the opportunity for a brief final statements, your takeaway, your key thought. If you had one thing that you could say or ask for the future or advice to give, what would it be? So let's go in our well-established order. Isabel, you are always going first. You're the pioneer.
Thank you very much. I actually have three very quick points, so I will hurry up. So the first is, there is this great demand for timeliness of data, and I think official data providers have to respond to that. And I think the way to go is having official statistics on the one hand and experimental data on the other hand. The second point, very strongly also pushed by Stefano, is communication. So that's absolutely crucial, and the communication has to be adjusted to the respective audience. And the third very important point is international collaboration. And I would also like to emphasize again the need to introduce unique identifiers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these points. Lars?
I would like to make three final points. First of all, we've seen the user requirements, the user demands in this conference. We need more information overall, more real-time information, more granular data. Second, we have emphasized the trade-offs regarding accuracy, reliability, for example, comparability, national, international, regional, and the bureaucratic burden finally. And third, I would like to emphasize how important further progress regarding digitalization is in that regard. It is a possibility, a means to solve some of these problems that we emphasized. For example, standardization and timeliness. In order to have this progress in digitalization, we need to find a better outcome within the trade-off between information requirements on the one side and data protection requirements on the other side. And we also need to have a more stronger emphasis on data security. Perhaps this might help us within this trade-off as well.
Thank you very much. It sounds like a challenging program for us in the statistical community in the future, but that's good. We want to respond positively to our users. Dominic, what do you say?
Thank you, Stefan. Just like my predecessors, just three short remarks. The first remark is that crisis pushes for a pool of new ideas for the coming years, and we need to follow these ideas. We need to push to innovate, and that's a very important starting point. The second thing is data stewardship and being a data steward. As you said, Stefan, I fully agree with that. We need to go beyond the products and offer like very advanced services. Actually reach out to our stakeholders, to our users, and be with them, be among them, and really just work with them. It's of course a big challenge that the situation across the countries varies heavily, but that's certainly one of the ways that we need to follow. And the third remark is that we have to have a clear innovation agenda for the coming years, and this way or the other, it can be strategic document or whatever, but it needs to be based on collaboration partnership with external partners, and this foundation, which is a harmonization across the countries. I think that's very important. Or planning, managing, evaluation of that has to be established in order to be successful. And an important sub-dimension in it is to strengthen the cooperation with the academia. This is something that is particularly important for us here, but in Poland, but I guess across Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Agnes, your final thoughts?
So everybody has 3 points, and I have 3 points too, 3 takeaways, which I would like to finish on a positive note. First, in this crisis, I think we have shown collectively that we are capable of technological breakthroughs. And this is also the case within the statistical institutes. Think about the data collection problems in the middle of the lockdown. And the statistical institutes have innovated, and in France they have been very, very swift in providing some insight of what's going on, and we should really be happy with this that the fact that have proved to be quite agile, to be able to adapt to this new situation. The second thing is that here at the Ministry of Finance, we are not only doing nowcasting, which was already also the case before the crisis, but now we are doing now evaluation, if I may use this term. So we are used to evaluate economic policies ex ante with simulations of macro or micro models, and ex post with diff evaluations, for instance. But what we are doing is also evaluation in the middle of the deployment of the policies to see whether they are
complementing leading economic indicator with indicator on well-being of the community on social and environmental spheres. In Europe, policy making will allow the EU emerge stronger from the current crisis, while facing future shocks with improved resilience. My committee will continue its effort to make this a reality, and we will continue to support your activity. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Stefano, and thank you everybody in the panel. This was a fantastic discussion. I mean, it was definitely worth my crawling out of bed at a very early hour in New York. I very much enjoyed it. Thank you for all the intellectual power that you brought to the table. Thank you also for making this a very lively discussion and referring to each other. We felt very, very close, even though we are all distanced, but we were definitely intellectually close, and close in our passion that we care about this topic of having really good data to inform our important policy decision making. And if I may make a final remark, as a person who has dedicated their life to unite nations and to bring people together, I am very happy at the many mentions of cooperation and trying to find solutions together. And so I wanted to thank Agnes also for finishing on a positive and optimistic note. I take this also away from this panel that here are a number of experts in the European sphere, and I can assure you the rest of the world is also eager to engage and to find solutions together that are good for all of us. So thank you to all of you, and thank you to the German hosts. My last task is to turn over back to Dr. Thiel and thank him and his team again for this fantastic organization. They have done all the hard work of putting this together. So thank you for that. And Dr. Thiel, as the host, you have the final words.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, thank you very much for your contributions and this interesting and simulating discussion. Special thanks to Isabel, Lars, Dominic, Agnes, and Stefano. But a very special thanks to Stefan in New York, who made a very impressive moderation very early in the morning in New York. Thank you very much, Stefan, for this job you have done. I agree with all of your concluding remarks, so I do not want to repeat these, even so they are all evenly important. But what I would like to add is the conclusion I draw from today's discussion is that official statistic is not anymore just a producer of data. The crisis has shown that official statistics need to be a service provider that manages information. That means to offer information by different providers to ensure high quality and to put information into a bigger picture. A bigger picture which can understand from everyone. We are on a good path, but we have still some way to go. The ESS recovery dashboard for Europe will be such a product that is on this way. We published the dashboard for Europe in the mid of December and updated every month permanently. It aims at tracking the economic and social developments during the recovery from the COVID-19 outbreak in the member states and European Union as a whole. I hope you find today's event as informative as I did. Dear audience members, I would like to thank you too for your attention, your interest in this event and your excellent questions. Stay healthy for all the next months. Thank you very much.